Have you ever wondered? If a book claimed to reveal a divine calendar, created not by man, but by God himself, why would religious authorities want to silence it? What if that same book unveiled the real reason for the Great Flood? Exposed the origin of demons? And declared that some laws given to Moses were actually older than creation itself? This is not fiction. This is the Book of Jubilees. An ancient text once held sacred in Ethiopia, but banned or ignored by nearly every major branch of Christianity. For over 2,000 years, it remained buried, both literally and spiritually. Forgotten. Suppressed. Feared. Why? Because the Book of Jubilees doesn't just retell familiar Bible stories, it rewrites the timeline, names the enemy, and challenges everything we thought we knew about God's law, angelic beings, and the hidden war that began before Eden. It dares to say, angels were created before light. The Sabbath existed before heaven and earth. And evil? It had a plan, far older than humanity itself. So what makes this book so dangerous? Why was it excluded from most biblical canons? And what secrets might it still hold that threaten the foundations of modern theology? In this episode of Veil of Mystery, we'll uncover the 10 most controversial revelations found within the Book of Jubilees, and explore what they might mean for humanity's past, present, and future. This isn't just ancient history. This is forbidden knowledge. And it was never meant to be found. Secret 1, God's solar calendar. Hidden deep within the pages of the Book of Jubilees is a radical claim, one that challenges the foundation of every modern religious calendar. According to this ancient text, the calendar we've followed for centuries is wrong. Not slightly wrong. Fundamentally wrong. The Book of Jubilees doesn't simply criticize the traditional lunar calendar used by Judaism and other cultures. It replaces it entirely with what it calls the divine solar calendar, designed and revealed by God himself. This sacred system consists of exactly 364 days, neatly divided into 52 perfect weeks. No leap years. No extra months. No human adjustments. Just pure celestial order. And here's the most astonishing part. The book says that an angel of the presence, a high-ranking celestial being, delivered this calendar directly to Moses on Mount Sinai. It wasn't created by man. It was dictated by heaven. But why does this matter? Because this solar calendar ensured that every holy festival, Passover, Shavuot, Tabernacles, would always fall on the same day of the week, year after year. There would be no confusion. No miscalculations. No shifting Sabbaths. It was a system of perfect spiritual rhythm. A cosmic metronome syncing heaven and earth. But to the religious leaders in ancient Jerusalem, it was a threat. The temple operated on a lunar calendar, one that required human observation of moon phases to determine festivals. It was less precise, more subjective, and more dependent on priestly authority. In other words, the divine solar calendar challenged their control. If people began observing God's festivals by a calendar revealed through angels, not priests, it could undermine the temple's authority, its rituals, even its political power. So what happened? The Book of Jubilees was silenced. Banned. Buried. Its scrolls systematically destroyed or hidden. Its teachings erased from religious discourse, for centuries. Only the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, isolated by geography and tradition, preserved the book within their biblical canon. While the rest of the Christian world standardized its scripture, Ethiopia held on to a version of the Bible that included this forbidden knowledge. And then, the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. In the mid-20th century, Bedouin shepherds stumbled upon clay jars in the caves of Qumran, near the Dead Sea. Inside were fragments of ancient manuscripts, including sections of the Book of Jubilees, written in original Hebrew. This discovery was monumental. It proved the book's authenticity and ancient origin. And it reignited a debate that had been buried for 2,000 years. But here's where it gets even more compelling. Among the Dead Sea Scrolls, scholars found that the Qumran sect, possibly the Essenes, also followed a solar calendar strikingly similar to the one in Jubilees. They rejected the temple. They rejected the priesthood. And they believed that true holiness meant aligning one's life, not with the moon, but with the sun, and with God's eternal order. So ask yourself, what does it mean that a secret calendar exists, one that claims divine origin, perfect mathematical symmetry, and direct angelic transmission? Could the calendar you follow be part of the deception? And if this solar calendar really is from God, then what other truths have we abandoned without knowing? As we continue to explore the forbidden pages of the Book of Jubilees, we'll discover that this calendar is only the beginning. The war between heaven and earth has always included time. Secret 2, Angels created before light. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's how the book of Genesis begins. But what if there was something, or someone, before even that? The Book of Jubilees makes a stunning declaration. It says that before the universe was lit by the first ray of divine light, before the separation of night and day, the angels already existed. Yes, you heard that right. Angels, those messengers of heaven, beings of immense power and holiness, were not created during the first days of creation, as many assume. According to Jubilees, they predate creation itself. This revelation alone rewrites the spiritual timeline. It means the cosmos was not empty when God said, "Let there be light." It was already filled, with watchful eyes, with celestial beings, with a divine court ready to act. And among these early creations were specific ranks. The angels of the presence, who serve directly before God. The spirits of nature, who control fire, wind, snow, and thunder. And yes, the watchers, those who would later fall. But why would God create angels before light? Before land, water, stars, or humanity? Because light is physical. But order, will, and hierarchy are spiritual. The angelic realm was formed to administer what was about to come. To govern creation. To serve God's eternal law. In a way, they were not just witnesses to creation, they were its original caretakers. And yet, not all of them remained loyal. This early creation of angels explains a great mystery. Why evil appeared so quickly? Why temptation entered Eden? Why rebellion in heaven seems to run parallel with the birth of man? The Book of Jubilees doesn't shy away from this. In fact, it declares another radical truth. The Sabbath, God's holy day of rest, also existed before creation. It was not an invention for humanity. It was not revealed for the first time to Moses. Instead, it was already written on the heavenly tablets, a kind of divine record-keeping system, long before the universe came into being. This means the structure of time itself, 6 days of work, 1 day of sacred rest, was not just a rhythm for humans. It was a cosmic law, embedded in the very DNA of creation. And what about the Garden of Eden? Jubilees describes it with unique detail. Adam and Eve were not merely naked. They were clothed in garments of light, luminous coverings that gave them an almost angelic appearance. It was only after the fall that they lost this radiant form and became truly naked. But the most jarring detail comes next. Jubilees directly names the serpent in the garden. It is not symbolic. It is not ambiguous. The serpent is Satan. While Genesis leaves this identity vague, open to interpretation, Jubilees makes it explicit. From the very beginning of humanity's story, a spiritual war was already underway. One in which angels and demons, light and darkness, had long been at odds, long before the first human breath. So what does this all mean? It means we were not born into peace. We were born into a battleground. The creation story was never just about atoms, oceans, and planets. It was about conflict. About an ancient hierarchy that fractured. And about a divine timeline that began long before the beginning. Angels existed before light. Which begs the question. What else came before us that we've never been told? Secret 3, the Nephilim, the Watchers, and the origin of demons. In Genesis chapter 6, there is a cryptic line, a haunting reference to beings called the Nephilim. It says they were giants who lived on the earth in ancient days, and then, just like that, the Bible moves on. But the Book of Jubilees doesn't move on. It dives in. It expands that one mysterious verse into a full cosmic drama. A story of seduction, rebellion, and blood. According to Jubilees, the descent of evil onto the earth did not begin with human sin, but with the Watchers. These were not ordinary angels. They were sent from heaven to watch over mankind, to guide and protect the human race. But instead, they were the first to fall. Captivated by human beauty, the Watchers abandoned their posts, took women for themselves, and taught forbidden knowledge to humanity. They introduced sorcery, astrology, weapon making, cosmetics used for deception. They gave humanity power, but without wisdom. And with power came corruption. From these unnatural unions came monstrous offspring, the Nephilim. They were not just giants in size, but in hunger. First, they devoured the food of humans. Then, they turned on the animals. And finally, on each other. And on us. The earth became soaked in blood. Violence and injustice spread like wildfire. And behind it all, a darker presence loomed, one who had orchestrated the chaos from the shadows. His name was Mastema. Unlike the vague Satan of many biblical texts, Mastema is clearly defined in Jubilees. He is the chief of the evil spirits, the architect of corruption, the accuser and tempter of mankind. It was Mastema who stirred the Watchers to fall. It was he who twisted their gifts into curses. Faced with the growing evil on earth, God acted. He bound the Watchers in chains. And then, came the flood. A divine cleansing. A reset. But even here, in humanity's darkest hour, Mastema did not retreat. He approached God with a chilling request. Do not destroy all the spirits of the giants. Let me keep a tenth. So that I may use them, to test mankind. And here's the twist. God agreed. 1/10 of the evil spirits, born from the dead Nephilim, were permitted to remain. These spirits became the origin of demons. They are not fallen angels. They are the disembodied souls of hybrid giants, beings born of heaven and earth, who were never meant to exist. And because of their unnatural birth, they cannot rest. They wander. They torment. They whisper in the ears of the weak and seek to twist the hearts of the strong. According to Jubilees, these demons still serve Mastema, tempting, deceiving, accusing, with divine permission, as part of mankind's spiritual testing. This revelation redefines how we understand evil. In most Christian traditions, demons are abstract. They are metaphors. Shadows. But in Jubilees, they have names. Origins. Intent. They were not created by God, but permitted. And their existence is a reminder that humanity walks a razor's edge, caught in a war between obedience and destruction. The Great Flood wasn't just about wiping away sin. It was a divine response to a spiritual contamination, a corruption so deep that it threatened the very fabric of creation. But even after the waters receded, evil remained. Because 1/10 of the spirits were spared. And to this day, they walk among us. Secret 4, Divine Laws Before Moses, what Noah already knew. When we think of divine law, we usually think of Moses. The 10 Commandments. Mount Sinai. Tablets carved by the very hand of God. But the Book of Jubilees introduces a radical twist. According to its pages, Noah already knew the law. Long before Moses, long before Sinai, long before Israel even existed, God's commandments were already in effect. How? Because these laws, as Jubilees claims, were not invented at Sinai, they were revealed again. They were eternal decrees, already recorded on the heavenly tablets, God's unchanging record of divine order. And Noah, survivor of the flood, was entrusted with them. Let's break that down. After the great flood, Noah steps into a world reborn. A world washed clean, but fragile. It was a fresh start, not just for humanity, but for divine instruction. And what did Noah receive? First, the Sabbath. Not as a new ritual, but as a sacred time that existed before creation itself. Noah was commanded to observe it, to rest and to remember the cosmic order. Second, dietary laws. The distinction between clean and unclean animals, something many believe began with Moses, was already known to Noah. He was taught what could be eaten, what should be avoided, and which animals were acceptable for sacrifice. Third, the Feast of Weeks, Shavuot. According to Jubilees, this festival didn't begin with the giving of the law at Sinai. It was already part of God's covenant with Noah. This flips the script. It tells us that the structure of Israelite worship, the Sabbaths, the sacrifices, the feasts, wasn't born in the desert. It was part of a much older covenant, stretching all the way back to the flood, and even before. So what does this mean? It means that divine law is not tied to one nation, one prophet, or one mountain. It's cosmic. It's timeless. And it's woven into the very framework of creation. Even more fascinating, Jubilees records that Noah was instructed by angels, the same angels of the presence, who later appeared to Abraham and guided Moses. These celestial messengers didn't just deliver messages. They taught. They revealed. They handed down the laws from the heavenly tablets. And then, there's this. After the flood, God commanded Noah to divide the earth among his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. But he didn't do this based on his own judgment. According to Jubilees, Noah received exact instructions, divine coordinates, on how to portion the earth. He even cast lots to ensure that the division was ordained by God, not influenced by human bias. This act reinforces a deeper truth. The borders of nations, the rise of tribes, and the spread of humanity were not accidents. They were pre-written. Inscribed in heaven before they unfolded on earth. And here's where it gets prophetic. The Book of Jubilees warns that if any nation were to invade or possess land not allotted to them, it would be seen as rebellion, not just against other humans, but against the will of God. This idea, of pre-assigned land and divine geography, adds a powerful layer to modern conflicts over territory and identity. According to Jubilees, these disputes aren't just political. They're spiritual violations. So what can we take from all this? Noah, often seen as a passive survivor of the flood, emerges in Jubilees as a covenant bearer, a law keeper, and a divine steward. He wasn't just chosen to rebuild the world, he was chosen to restore God's order. And that order, the Book of Jubilees insists, did not begin with Moses. It was already beating like a sacred pulse beneath the surface of history. It just needed someone willing to listen. Secret 5, Plagues and the War Against Egypt's Gods. The Book of Exodus tells us about the 10 plagues of Egypt. Water turning to blood. Frogs. Darkness. Death. But what if these weren't just acts of divine punishment? What if they were acts of war? According to the Book of Jubilees, the plagues weren't simply about freeing the Israelites from Pharaoh's grip. They were strategic strikes, aimed directly at the heart of Egypt's spiritual system. And that system was dark. Egypt wasn't just a kingdom of pyramids and power, it was a kingdom of gods. Dozens of them. Each plague, then, was not random, it was a calculated assault on one of Egypt's deities. Take the Nile, for example. The first plague, turning water to blood, was a blow against Hapi, the god of the river. The frogs? A mockery of Hecate, the goddess of fertility and rebirth, often depicted with the head of a frog. The darkness? A direct challenge to Ra, the sun god, the supreme deity in Egypt's pantheon. And the death of the firstborn? That was a blow so personal, it struck Pharaoh himself. It was God declaring his dominion not just over Israel, but over life itself. But there's more. The Book of Jubilees reveals a hidden player in this battle, Mastema. While the Bible describes Pharaoh's hardened heart, Jubilees gives that hardness a name. It was Mastema, the prince of evil spirits, who worked behind the scenes to twist Pharaoh's will, empower Egypt's magicians, and oppose Moses at every step. It was Mastema who gave the sorcerers the ability to mimic some of Moses' miracles, turning staffs into serpents, turning water to blood, only to be ultimately outmatched. But Mastema's involvement didn't end there. According to Jubilees, he tried to kill Moses, before the mission to free Israel ever began. A preemptive strike. An attempt to silence the liberator before the battle even started. Why? Because this wasn't just a political liberation. This was a confrontation between two kingdoms, one of light, and one of darkness. Moses wasn't just leading slaves to freedom. He was leading them out of a spiritual empire, one controlled by gods who were, in truth, demonic powers. Jubilees names them plainly. Egypt's gods were fallen spirits, ruled by Mastema. And the Exodus was a divine revolution. Each plague stripped away a layer of Egypt's spiritual armor. Each blow was a statement. Your gods have no power here. And the final plague, the death of the firstborn, was the ultimate act of judgment. The plague passed over the homes of Israel, marked with lamb's blood. But every Egyptian household, from Pharaoh's palace to the poorest servant's hut, faced the same fate. It was God versus the gods, and only one remained standing. But Mastema wasn't finished. As Israel prepared to leave Egypt, free at last, Mastema was temporarily bound by angels, restrained from interfering. But at the final moment, just as the Israelites began their escape, he was released. And once again, he struck. He whispered into Pharaoh's heart, changed his mind, and unleashed Egypt's armies to pursue God's people to the edge of the Red Sea. Mastema's goal was clear. If he couldn't stop Moses, if he couldn't prevent the Exodus, then he would try to drown the promise in the sea. But he failed. The sea opened. Israel passed through. And Egypt's armies were swallowed whole. So what does this mean? It means the Exodus wasn't just about human liberation. It was a spiritual confrontation, a battle between the Creator and the counterfeit, between the God of Israel and the demonic powers behind Egypt's throne. And it raises a sobering question. If Egypt fell because it served false gods, how many modern nations unknowingly do the same? Secret 6, Abraham, angels, and the laws from heaven. Most people know Abraham as the father of faith. The one who heard God's voice and obeyed without question. But the Book of Jubilees paints a far more complex, and far more supernatural, picture of this patriarch. According to Jubilees, Abraham wasn't just a man of faith. He was a man of divine instruction. A man who received the law, centuries before Moses. And his teacher? Not a priest. Not a prophet. But angels. Specifically, the angels of the presence, a class of celestial beings who dwell in the immediate presence of God. These weren't messengers sent to deliver a single vision. They were teachers. Guides. Archivists of the heavenly tablets, on which were recorded all of God's decrees from before the creation of the world. So what exactly did Abraham learn from them? Jubilees reveals that he was taught the commandments, the festivals, the purity laws, and even the division of time, the sacred calendar that would later govern Israel's worship. But more than that, he was shown the future. Abraham was told, in detail, about the coming bondage of his descendants in Egypt. He was told about Moses, the Exodus, and the giving of the law on Mount Sinai. He was even told about the spiritual war that would rage across generations, a war between the children of promise and the children of rebellion. And through it all, the angels urged him to keep the covenant. Not just for his sake, but so that his descendants would inherit a blessing that stretched into eternity. This turns the traditional narrative upside down. Because if Abraham already had the law, if the festivals were already celebrated, if the divine calendar was already known, then Moses wasn't the origin point. He was the restorer. And Abraham? He was the first human custodian of the heavenly system, an eternal framework for worship and obedience, handed down not by tradition, but by the stars. And here's where it gets even deeper. The Book of Jubilees claims that Abraham wrote books, records, scrolls that contained everything he had learned from the angels. He passed these writings on to Isaac. Isaac passed them to Jacob. And Jacob, in turn, taught them to his 12 sons. This secret lineage of knowledge, a hidden Torah, preserved before Sinai, was meant to keep the people of God aligned with heaven's will even as they wandered through earthly trials. It's no wonder the Book of Jubilees was feared. Because it challenges the very structure of religious authority. It says, God does not wait for institutions. He speaks to those who will listen. And Abraham listened. He built altars in precise locations, guided by angelic instruction. He offered sacrifices on appointed days, according to the heavenly calendar. And when he was tested, told to sacrifice Isaac, he obeyed, trusting not in what he saw, but in what he knew from above. In the end, Abraham's story is not just about belief. It's about alignment. Alignment with the unseen. With the eternal. With the God who speaks through angels, reveals through visions, and writes his laws in the skies. The Book of Jubilees reveals a version of Abraham that is almost otherworldly. Not just a pilgrim wandering toward a promised land, but a chosen man walking in sync with the rhythms of heaven. And maybe that's why modern readers are never told this version. Because if Abraham could receive the law without Sinai, if angels taught him divine mysteries, then the real question is, what else have we been kept from knowing? Secret 7, the fall of the tower, more than just pride. We've all heard the story. A towering structure built to reach the heavens. A people united in purpose. A God who descended, confused their language, and scattered them across the earth. But what if the Tower of Babel wasn't just about human pride? What if it was about open rebellion, a cosmic mutiny against divine order? The Book of Jubilees offers a chilling expansion to this well-known tale. It tells us that the tower wasn't merely a symbol of arrogance. It was a strategic move by a post-flood humanity, led by Nimrod, to establish a spiritual stronghold, one that would reconnect them to the Watchers, the very beings whose corruption led to the flood in the first place. According to Jubilees, the people didn't just want to make a name for themselves. They wanted to reopen the gates of heaven. The goal wasn't simply architectural, it was theological. The tower was a portal, a ziggurat that could pierce the firmament and re-establish contact with the divine realm on humanity's terms, not God's. And God? He saw it coming. Jubilees says that God didn't just scatter their speech, he sent a wind, a divine force, to topple the tower itself. The foundation was torn from the earth. Its height shattered. Its bricks, symbols of human strength, reduced to nothing. But here's where it gets darker. This wasn't just the end of a building. It was the birth of nations. Jubilees claims that at Babel, 70 nations were formed, not just linguistically, but spiritually divided. Each nation was assigned to a different angelic prince, rulers of the unseen realm. But only one nation, Israel, was kept for God himself. This reshaping of the world order marked the beginning of a deep fragmentation. The world wasn't just politically split, it was placed under spiritual jurisdictions. Some of these angelic overseers were faithful. Many were not. And in time, these princes of the nations would become the gods of mythology, demanding worship, sacrifices, and blood. So, in one act, Babel became both a ruin and a beginning. The ruin of humanity's attempt to storm heaven. The beginning of a cosmic chessboard, where every nation was now a pawn in a deeper, invisible war. But there's more. Jubilees suggests that the technology and knowledge used in building the tower, the tools of heaven, didn't come from man alone. Echoes of forbidden knowledge, passed down from the Watchers, preserved even after the flood, were used to build Babel. And that raises a haunting possibility. What if Babel wasn't the last time humanity tried to reclaim the heavens? What if the desire to build higher, reach further, and unite globally under a false god is still happening today, but with satellites instead of bricks? Artificial intelligence instead of altars. And rebellion disguised as progress? Babel was not just about language. It was about loyalty. It asked, who do you serve, yourself, or the Creator? And when humanity chose self-exaltation, God responded, not with annihilation, but with division. But even in judgment, there was mercy. Because from that fragmentation, God preserved one people. One line. Through Shem. Through Abraham. Through Israel. A covenant not built on towers, but on trust. And the ruins of Babel still whisper a warning to us today. The moment humanity forgets who the true God is the moment we start building towers again. Secret 8, Satan's real role, the shadow behind Mastema. In most traditional Christian teachings, Satan is the great adversary. The deceiver. The serpent in the garden. The accuser of mankind. But what if the Bible has been hiding a darker figure behind the curtain, a name rarely spoken, but whose actions span from Eden to Exodus? In the Book of Jubilees, that figure is called Mastema. Who is he? Some scholars interpret Mastema as another name for Satan. Others argue he is separate, a distinct spiritual being tasked with overseeing the realm of evil spirits. But here's what makes it stranger. In Jubilees, Mastema works under God's permission. Yes, you heard that right. When Noah pleads with God to remove the evil spirits, spawned from the Nephilim, from corrupting mankind again, God orders that most be bound. But Mastema protests. He asks that at least 1/10 of the evil spirits be allowed to remain under his control. To test humanity. To bring trials. To ensure that the wicked are punished. And astonishingly, God agrees. This forces us to ask a haunting question. Is Mastema just a rebel? Or is he playing a divine role? He appears again and again, manipulating Pharaoh, trying to kill Moses, leading armies of destruction. But he doesn't act in chaos. He acts with intention. He becomes something like a prosecuting attorney in the divine courtroom, accusing, testing, and exposing the flaws of humanity. So what does this mean for Satan? The name Satan in Hebrew means adversary or accuser. But the Bible rarely uses the term as a proper name. Instead, it often describes a role, the Satan, the challenger of man's righteousness. Mastema, then, could be a title. Or a specific entity who embodies the satanic function, not merely to destroy, but to divide, expose, and prove. He operates in the shadows of divine justice, not as a rogue devil, but as a dark servant, allowed to carry out tasks too dangerous for any angel of light. Jubilees reveals a spiritual system far more intricate and uncomfortable than most are willing to admit. It tells us, not all evil is rogue. Some of it is permitted. Some of it is part of the test. This turns our theology inside out. Because if Mastema is allowed to act, even under God's watch, then perhaps evil is not always about chaos, but about choice. He tests. But he cannot force. He accuses. But he cannot condemn. He tempts. But we decide. This is the terrifying freedom God has given humanity. And in this light, Satan, or Mastema, is not a cartoon villain with horns. He is the mirror we're forced to face. The one who whispers in weakness, presses in suffering, and waits for the heart to either fall, or stand. So why was this truth hidden? Because it complicates everything. It reveals a God who permits trial, not out of cruelty, but out of trust. He believes his children can pass the test, even when the accuser is at the door. In the Book of Job, Satan asks to test the righteous man. In Jubilees, Mastema does the same, but not just to Job. To all of us. He is still at work. Still sifting. Still accusing. But his time is limited. Because while Mastema may act in the courtroom now, there will come a day when he will be judged by the very ones he tried to condemn. Secret 9, the heavenly tablets and the war over time. What if the true laws of the universe were not written on paper, but on heavenly tablets, etched before time itself began? According to the Book of Jubilees, such tablets exist. They're not symbolic. They're not metaphorical. They are real, and they serve as the divine record of everything that has happened, and everything that will. The book says these tablets were created before the foundation of the world. They contain not only the commandments, but also the chronology of history, past, present, and future. Every event. Every prophecy. Every appointed time and season. Nothing is random. And these tablets were not hidden in heaven. They were shown to the patriarchs, Noah, Abraham, Moses, through angelic messengers who read from them and passed on their knowledge. Which means the entire plan of salvation. The fall of nations. The return of the Messiah. All of it was written long before Genesis was even spoken. But here's the most mysterious part. The Book of Jubilees warns that humanity has rebelled against these tablets, not by burning them, but by altering their reflection on earth, time. It accuses mankind of corrupting the calendar, of shifting from God's ordained 364-day solar year to the lunar calendars used by pagan nations. This wasn't just a clerical error. It was a spiritual war over time itself. Why? Because time governs worship. Feasts. Sabbaths. Atonements. If the calendar is altered, then the people of God are out of sync with heaven. And this, according to Jubilees, was not an accident. It was part of a long-term plan, led by fallen angels and rebellious nations, to sever the connection between earth and the heavenly order. Imagine it. Every year we celebrate God's holy days, but on the wrong days. Every time we look at the moon to mark time, we're using a system created by those who defied him. Jubilees says, they will make the year begin with the wrong days. And all the appointed times will be disrupted. The feasts will not align. The people will not know. And God will hide his face. This is the war over time. A war fought not with weapons, but with clocks. With calendars. With confusion. It may sound small. But if God's holy rhythm is broken, then access to his presence becomes misaligned. This is why the Book of Jubilees places such emphasis on restoring the original calendar. It's not legalism. It's realignment. To walk in sync with the heavenly tablets is to walk in step with eternity. It's to remember that God's order wasn't made to adapt to man. Man was created to flow with God's time. And maybe that's why the Book of Jubilees was suppressed. Because if we rediscovered the truth about God's calendar, if we aligned our worship not by tradition, but by the stars he placed in motion, then religion would lose control. And God would take his rightful place as the true keeper of time. So the next time you check a date, ask yourself, whose time are you living on? Secret 10, the prophecy of division and the last days. Tucked near the end of the Book of Jubilees is a prophecy that few ever speak of. It's not about beasts rising from the sea, or fiery judgments raining from the sky. It's something far more subtle. And far more terrifying. It speaks of a time of great division, when even those who claim to know God will be split apart. In the last days, children will rise against parents. Wisdom will perish from the wise. And the hearts of many will harden, as if struck by iron. This prophecy isn't cloaked in symbols. It's straightforward. A picture of a world that looks a lot like ours. But here's what makes it more chilling. The Book of Jubilees doesn't frame this division as merely social or political. It calls it spiritual betrayal. It says that the covenant, the sacred bond between God and his people, will be forgotten. Not just by outsiders, but by those who once kept it. The Sabbath will be neglected. The festivals abandoned. The commandments dismissed as old. And in their place, a new religion, man-made, emotion-driven, detached from the calendar and laws God himself wrote on the heavenly tablets. This division won't come through war. It will come through compromise. And yet, the book doesn't end in despair. It speaks of a remnant, a small group who will remember the covenant, who will rediscover the calendar, who will return to the ancient paths, not out of nostalgia, but because truth echoes across time. This remnant will suffer. They'll be mocked, isolated, even persecuted. But they will be the torchbearers in a world drowning in artificial light. Because while the rest of humanity chases false peace, these few will prepare for the true king. The Book of Jubilees says that in the final generation, God will once again act. Not through floods. Not through fire. But through restoration. He will shine his face again on the earth. The calendar will be corrected. The heavenly order will be re-established. And the accusers, those like Mastema, will be silenced forever. But only if the covenant is remembered. This is not just about prophecy. It's about positioning. Because in the war for truth, neutrality is not an option. Either we drift with the divided, or we return to the path laid before the stars were hung in the sky. The Book of Jubilees was banned, hidden, forgotten. But maybe that was never an accident. Maybe it was preserved for now. For this generation. For those who can still hear the whisper beneath the noise. Return. Remember. Prepare. The end isn't just about destruction. It's about decision. And the question remains. Will we be part of the great falling away? Or the great return? So now we return to the beginning, with eyes wide open. What began as a search for 10 forgotten secrets hidden in an ancient, forbidden book, has brought us to a much deeper revelation. The Book of Jubilees isn't just a relic. It's a mirror. A mirror that reflects not only the past, but the present we're standing in, and the future we're rushing toward. It speaks of calendars, but warns of disconnection from divine rhythm. It speaks of angels, but reveals a war raging invisible and ancient. It speaks of laws, but reminds us that truth doesn't evolve with culture, it's etched in eternity. Most people have never heard these teachings. Why? Because they challenge the status quo. They strip away tradition and expose how far we've drifted from the original blueprint. But here's the paradox. What was once banned, what was once called heresy, now sounds like clarity in an age drowning in noise. The Book of Jubilees doesn't predict our future, it explains our present. It tells us why the world feels fractured, why our faith feels hollow, why our time feels stolen. And above all, it reminds us, God was never silent. We just stopped listening. So what do we do now? We don't need to build towers or uncover secret scrolls. We simply need to return. Return to the ancient rhythm. Return to the original covenant. Return to the voice that once walked with Adam, warned Noah, guided Abraham, and still whispers today. You don't need to agree with every line of the Book of Jubilees. But if it wakes something up inside you, a hunger for what's been lost, then maybe that's not by accident. Maybe you were meant to remember. Because in the end, it's not about secret knowledge. It's about sacred alignment. The question is, will you dismiss it as myth? Or will you recognize it as a call home? The choice has always been yours.